Ōtākaro, Avon River Corridor, Waitaki Street, Stopbank, Relocation Advancement. That nice, short, sweet title belies the work going on this. So welcome, Keith and Tom, and Adam again. Would you like to introduce this for us today?
So we have a short introduction, and if you have time, with permission, a very short presentation. That's okay?
Yes.
Okay. So just to go back a little bit and put a bit of context, we've been working on the last couple of years on improving the Avon stop banks in order to give enough time for the regeneration plan for the Avon corridor to be developed and delivered against. The regeneration plan came out last year, and when that came out we saw that as an opportunity. The opportunity being that if we were to deliver the Waitaki Street section now, or as soon as possible, then it saves us having to strengthen or improve that section of Stopbank that was remaining when the regeneration plan was published. It also would have some other benefits that we're probably aware of some of those issues, but we can talk to that later if you wish. In late last year, we began some investigations in order to determine the feasibility of delivering against the regeneration plan. We now believe that we have a viable project, and we bring that to you today, and together with the recommendation seeking approval to progress this project rapidly. Since the report was written, there's just a couple of updates to give. Unfortunately, we were unsuccessful with our bid for the government's shovel-ready funding, so I'll just give reference to that. Next time.
Yeah, I'm not really surprised, I'm saying it's sad.
The second update is we gave a briefing to the Coastal Burwood Community Board last week, and just an update on that. So I think it's fair to say, and the members present will update or contradict if I've got it wrong, but the sense was that the Community Board was supportive of this project and the starting work on the regeneration plan. There was some comments that have been given since then, both in support of the project and very supportive of the project, but also giving some comments and seeking some reassurance on some points of detail, particularly around issues of detail such as planting, fencing, the walkways and trails within that, all of which we believe we can resolve during detailed design. But if you want us to go through all those particular points, we can do that afterwards with responses. But I believe that we can respond to the community board,
Yep.
just giving some reassurance.
I think
if you're
so.
okay with that.
Yep.
So that was as much as I want to say by introduction. But Tom does have a short PowerPoint presentation just to put a bit of context.
Thank you very much, and my apologies for the long report title. That's entirely my fault. I'll
Accepted.
This is a very similar presentation to what I gave the community board very recently. Just quickly here, this is a location map of where the proposed works are in the corner of Pages Road, Anzac Drive and the Avon River. Some of the reasons why we're seeking to prioritise this work are primarily around the existing Stopbank condition. As Keith mentioned, it's been a very challenging piece of infrastructure to work on historically, and we'll think it'll be challenging to work on in the future. So if we focus on our long-term Avon Regen corridor work, then it avoids the need for doing so. There's high groundwater in the site. Obviously there's some history of poor drainage and poor access for the remaining resident there. On the plus side of changes more recently, there's been some good coastal vegetation growth in there with salt marsh starting to form, so that's an exciting glimpse into the future for the site. In terms of the OARC regeneration plan itself, this is just an excerpt from the plan showing the stormwater treatment facility, Stopbank and tidal wetland in this area, and when I flick to the landscape plan in just a second, you'll see that it's pretty strong alignment between the ideas that were put forward in the plan and what we're proposing to do as part of the works. So what you see in front of you now is the landscape master plan that's been prepared It includes a detention basin or detention pond on the bottom left-hand corner, or the bottom corner of the site, so that collects the first flush from existing urban areas and begins the treatment process. Then those water flows through a treatment wetland and then out beneath Anzac Drive to the existing pump station that was constructed by Skirk, pump station 232. Beside the treatment facility, there is a new Stopbank proposed, set back as far away from the river as possible in order to reduce the geotechnical requirements. And between the Stopbank and the existing river is the proposed tidal wetland. And you'll notice that there are islands left between the tidal wetland and the river, and that's what would be left of the Stopbank after we cut holes in it to let the river into that tidal wetland area to help that form very naturally. So the Stopbank's located where it is because we're constrained obviously by Anzac Drive and Pages Road and the amount of footprint we need for the stormwater treatment device. So what we will have to allow for in the future, and I'll talk about this in a minute, is the Bexley Landing that's not proposed to be delivered per se through this project, and the Pages Road Bridge realignment. We are getting quite good at building these things. We built a few of them recently, as you'll be aware. In the top left-hand corner, you'll see the Bullers Stream wetland. So the wetland component of the proposed treatment facility will look similar to that, and an aerial photo of that same site shown in the bottom left-hand corner. On the top, on the right of the screen, are some shots of Charlesworth Reserve, both from the air and from the ground. And that will be very much the sort of outcome we're seeking from the tidal wetland component. And in the middle at the bottom is Te Oranga Waikura, in Linwood Lower Fields old site. So those are the sort of outcomes we're looking to achieve in terms of a landscape perspective, and what you might envisage it looking like in a few years' time should you give the approval to proceed. In terms of those uncertainties with the project, we're still working through access for 92 Bexley Road and how we might tie that in to best meet the needs of both that resident and also access for maintenance and for the existing utilities that are still on the site. We have in that left-hand circle on the aerial photograph there's some existing Orion infrastructure, and exactly how we tie the new Stopbank into the existing Stopbank is still something that's we're working through the detailed design, and there might be some challenges there associated with that existing Orion infrastructure. There are a number of other unsettled properties with regards to utility providers owning land across the site, so we're still working through that. And as I mentioned earlier, there's other projects on in the vicinity, being the Pages Road Bridge realignment and the Bexley Landing. So we've just got to leave enough space for those activities to occur in the future, and do our best not to try and have to rework things later. Certainly don't want that going on. Right. The other uncertainty we're still working through is the first part of the treatment facility, whether or not that's an open water space or more a planted basin rather than a grass basin. So that's just something you might have seen annotated on the landscape plan. There's still a little bit of uncertainty there. Subject to your approval today, the next steps would be keeping the detailed design going, hoping to finish that up this calendar year and progress into securing the necessary resource consents and building consents for the work to proceed, and all going well, starting work early, well, going out to tender early next calendar year and starting on work on site soon thereafter. And that's all I have for you today.
Great, thank you very much. It certainly looks exciting. I've got questions coming up, but I'd just like to ask you a question about the mana whenua. Any response back yet?
Not that I'm aware of, unfortunately. Right. So we have applied through the usual channels for feedback, and we're still working on a process, I understand.
So you're working with Shane here as well on that?
Yes, absolutely. We've had briefings with Shane about the project. And
right. And also the other question, the OPEX of anticipated of 250k a year, that's not in the LTP?
It's not in the current LTP. We certainly need to look at that in the upcoming LTP. Now, it won't actually be 250 a year. That's just what the smooth cost is. For OPEX, we're expecting for facilities like this to have pretty low maintenance over the first periods, but then you need to effectively come in and clean out the treatment facility and remove the contaminated material that's accumulated there. So that's quite a big job. So that might be, dredging a wet pond, or getting into the wetland itself, removing the existing vegetation, clearing out the accumulated sediment which is contaminated, and replanting the site. So that's a pretty significant undertaking. But the wetland itself would be a decade away or more. The pond or wet basin at the start of the treatment facility, that's going to be far more frequent, because that's where the sediment initially accumulates.
Right, well, that's interesting. Okay, well, we'll keep us informed with that. Right, now Sam had a question, and then Tim.
Yeah, thank you. It's a really good report and quite interesting. Just the thing I'm trying to get my head around is the finances. So, and I can't see the paragraph, but it said we've got potentially an under or over of 30% on the 12 million. And yet the recommendation is to allocate the budget over a certain amount of years and then give you delegation to manage that in existing budget. So would that mean if it blew out by 3.6 million, you would just find that within existing budgets, or would that come back to us?
Well, because we're trying to deliver this rapidly, as Keith mentioned, we are looking to manage that with an existing staff delegations, and I could be corrected on this, but I would understand that $12 million budget would sit with the CE.
I think
the
it's
Chief Executive,
Dave,
maybe.
isn't it?
So, but the short answer is yes, the capital program is managed through existing staff
So
delegations.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is we approve it for 12 million, which to me does seem high, but if it did blow out by more, what's the visibility or the mechanism we have to approve that? Because we've been caught in the past with stuff. So I'm just a bit nervous about the recommendations in that respect, with no oversight from either this committee or F&P.
So there is a number of watch list projects, particularly, which do get identified, that keep a close eye on them. Finance and Performance Committee can always choose to select this for particular attention, so that there's regular updates. There's different ways we can keep visibility.
So I guess, sorry, I'll ask it once more and then I'll leave it. But if we were to sign off the recommendations as they are today, and this blows out by $3.6 million, does that come back to us for approval or not?
Any change requests go through the executive team. So, Caroline, I don't know if you want
And then
to
up
say
to
that.
council, over a certain amount up to council, and the size of this one would suggest that it would come through here.
But yeah, my question was, do the recommendations reflect that? Because it says delegate. No.
No.
Yeah.
So do you want to put a noting?
Well, no, I think you'd probably just remove that. Yeah.
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 And any changes.
Can I?
Yeah,
Yes.
you go on.
Well,
Do you want
just
to suggest-
reflecting on what has been said, because what has been happening in the past is that if projects are managed within a program and there is a shortfall, then it is taken from other parts of the program, and we get no line of sight over the setting of priorities for what is then diminished. But if there is money that is that if it comes in under budget, the same happens the other way around, and the swings and roundabouts rule does make it simpler from a staff perspective, but it removes governance oversight. So we need to find a balance that gives some degree of flexibility, encouraging always to come in under budget, of course, but with the ultimate requirement that the council's the one who sets the priorities for the program.
Certainly. May I just suggest that in considering that, you might want to think about the existing staff delegations that are there, and that the if there were some amount that were a flexibility that were considered appropriate, then you might wish to consider that. Just so, my concern really comes from if we're trying to progress this rapidly due to the condition of the existing infrastructure, that we have a reporting process that allows the project, and the governance oversight absolutely, but allows projects to continue to progress.
So I
at
guess,
some pace.
Pauline, perhaps I'll just signal that on point 2, if we can just remove and finances within existing staff delegations. Yeah, or finances. It's just, I'd be far more comfortable setting a budget of 12 mil, and then if it goes out, they come back for more money. Or we reprioritise within the existing budgets, but I think we need to be able to see that.
Yeah, it gives you oversight.
Visibility.
Does that work for you, Keith?
Yes, certainly, we can come
Yep,
back
great.
if there's a change in forecast.
That doesn't solve the problem because the existing staff delegation
That's true.
Should we set the budget saying at 12 million, and if it comes back, and
But there's got a contingency of 30%,
that's what I want to ask as well.
plus or minus, which would add another 4. Andrew, have you
Yeah,
got a
I mean,
suggestion?
30%.
Yeah, I mean, if what we're concerned about is that the budget's going to go above 12 million without any governance decision-making ability around that. I mean, oversight, yes, it can be reported back, but if you're moving quickly, it may well be that any changes approved under existing delegations and within existing programme budgets, and then it's just reported to us as a fact. I think probably if what Sam is saying is, and I would tend to agree with him, that what we want is, if there's any increase in budget over the 12 million, that requires to be approved by whichever committee. It might be Finance and Performance, it might be this committee, it could be by council, it could be any one of the three if we're interested in doing it quickly. Then we should state that in the resolution, because just removing the words and finances within existing staff delegations, well, that continues to be a fact that within staff delegations those approvals can occur. So just removing it from a resolution doesn't change the environment that we're working in, which is that staff can approve changes within programmes of work under delegation. So I think if we're wanting any changes to budget above $12 million to be approved by council, this committee, finance and performance, then we should say that.
Well, can I just ask a question then? What is the existing staff delegation? So what could they, how much higher could you go above?
It's 5 million. 5 million.
5 million.
5 million.
You can go to, okay, well on that, I concur with Andrew.
So notwithstanding staff delegations, the committee to approve
Yeah.
any expenditure in excess of $12 million.
Yeah.
That includes the contingent, that doesn't include the contingency, is that what you're saying?
Well, the contingency would then be void, wouldn't it? Unless it was under. If we're requesting that this come back for approval, should it exceed 12 million, then
But
the
then-
contingency's
But then there's no contingency, because if the budget is 12 million and we're saying there's no contingency, because
That's
that's what I was going
Yeah,
one of
That's
the
right.
30% is a massive swing anyway.
Yeah.
So
It's 4 million.
And I think that's what
Come
we
back.
want to say. If it's going to be over 12 million, we want to approve it.
yeah.
Okay.
You're right.
So could 3 happen under delegation, or does it need... Does Resolution 3 have any effect, or could that actually just happen anyway?
Because doesn't that just go back into the program?
Well, the intention of that third resolution was such that the LDRP 521 Avon floodplain management implementation spans many, many years to do these activities set in as a program. So it'll be just making sure that any savings below the 12 million will return to that particular place for that particular purpose, being these facilities throughout the Ōtākaro River corridor and working on the Stopbank network itself.
We're going through a significant LTP process, which involves priority setting across all of the different programs and elements of our capital program. So I don't know that I feel comfortable with making a decision about apportioning this expenditure in advance of that process.
But surely any reductions in the budget and the land drainage recovery program would be at a program level. So even if that did go back in, it could still be reduced at a program level through the LTP.
I guess I'm signalling that I'm not comfortable with the program approach on all aspects of the work that we do and that is currently under programs.
I can see that, but that would be addressed surely in the LTP. But have you got other wording you want to put in there instead or suggest?
No, I'm happy to vote against number 3.
Carolyn, what would be your advice if that money didn't go back into the program? Where would it go?
I suppose it's always the staff could be asked to advise on whether that money stayed within a land drainage overall, or go somewhere else within the capital program.
That's right.
So it could go transport or facilities. Savings, yeah, correct.
All right. Can we just get, I think Leanne's going to vote against 3. 2, Andrew, how you, with that wording, proof staff to manage the project?
Yeah, I've got, so my question on 3 remains unanswered, so we'll come back to that. But yeah, just to answer your question, Pauline, on 2, committees to approve any expenditure over 12 million will be sufficient.
Yes.
So to approve any expenditure.
Yep.
Yeah, that sorts that. But my question on 3, I mean, I certainly appreciate the point that Leanne's making, and I agree with it, and I think there's an approach that we need to take across the whole capital programme, but that's a different matter than how we deal with this one example that's in front of us before any changes that we might choose to make. If 3 wasn't carried today because a majority of people decided to vote against it, could that still happen anyway? Presumably, if we take a programme approach, then any remaining budget would go back into the programme and could then be applied to any other project within that programme, including the continuation of this one, regardless of whether there's a resolution of council, of this committee, that says that or not.
That's right.
Or is that not the case?
It's my understanding that that could be the case, but we're just trying to provide that clarity here today, that the intention of any underspend would be remaining inside the river corridor to do similar works.
That's right.
This is actually an example of something that we need to deal with as part of the LTP around programmes of work and prioritisation of budgets, and actually speaks to achieving the whole capital programme from a fiscal viewpoint, even though the priorities may be quite different within that fiscal envelope. So that's something we need to pick up as part of the LTP.
Yeah. Tim?
Yeah, thank you. Just two fairly simple questions, really. What would be the average for, or the usual for a contingency? Because in your slide presentation, you gave there are some photos there of other wetlands that you've done. So you guys are actually pretty skilled up with what you're doing. So I'm actually surprised that a 30% contingency is actually there. And I would have thought, we could have pulled it back to 10, because the 30% contingency has just stimulated a discussion about how much over the 12-year budget will have to come back. And now we've got to a position where we've got no contingency, and if it's over 12 million, it's got to come back. So I'm just wondering, what would the usual be, and would 10% be the usual standard? I'm not sure.
Well, we have had to prepare this report in advance of the detailed design being complete, and certainly well in advance of the tendering process. So the cost certainty at this stage isn't as high as we would normally be at this point in the approvals process. So that is why we have put it at 30%. And as I mentioned during my presentation, there were some uncertainties still remaining inside the project from a scope perspective, not only just a market perspective in terms of the construction cost and what you have on the table. So exactly that sort of tying around that infrastructure that could, Ryan infrastructure, say at the upstream end or the western end of the site, could drive some budget requirements which aren't included in that $12 million, and hence the 30% contingency at this stage. So it wasn't, it was reflective of where we are at the project and the uncertainties we see remaining to completion.
So when you have a project with a detailed design, what is your normal contingency? I guess the question is.
Again, it will depend on, contingencies are really built around risk and understanding of risk for an individual project, but it wouldn't be uncommon to have, say, 10% at the end of detailed design. When you get to tendering and you have a price, depending on the nature of the contract, that might come down again.
No, that's great.
So
Thank
it really
you.
is project.
Second question.
92
Bexley Road. obviously seems to be a wee bit of an issue with regards to access. Has there been any discussion with, is it NZTA or whoever, with regards to access off, is it Anzac Drive with a left in and a left out? Because it seems ridiculous to have one property in there, to have vehicle access through a reserve, and surely it must add to the cost, because any access that is provided, as if it's a cycle lane or a path, isn't designed to take the weight of it, of a vehicle full time. Whereas obviously with one house there, the access would have to be designed for 7 days a week access for a vehicle.
So have you talked to NZTA?
If I've understood your question correctly, yes, we are in discussions with NZTA. They haven't signed off or approved anything at this point of time. But we are signalling a desire to provide access to 92 Bexley Road
and
off Anzac Drive.
And to make it simple and easier for NZTA to swallow, a left in and a left out would be the ideal, wouldn't it? Because if they would be abhorrent against anyone crossing the white line or the yellow line, depending on what it is.
Well, it's very much in NZTA's court to advise us on what they believe is appropriate, but we're certainly putting safety into those considerations about how best to manage that access.
Right. So you'll be getting advice from our traffic engineers, I presume.
Right.
Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Tim. Good question. Yanni, and then Mike.
Yeah, I guess what I was concerned to read in here is that this is going to stop a number of other projects along the Heathcote and in St Albans and in Cashmere Worsley. So we're not being
stop them, but defer them.
Well, it'll delay them.
Yeah.
And it seems a bit weird that we would agree to a project without explicit resolution to actually state what's happening with those projects other than just delaying. So, I mean, I just can't quite get my head around, like, the low stop banks. Have we got a report coming back on that about what's happening?
Yes, there is low stop banks are coming.
And why isn't that being done at the same time that we're taking money off that budget?
Well, inherently we're not taking money off any budget. It's about the timing of when that budget is available. So the LTP, the current line item for Heathcote low stop banks, won't change in total value. It's just about the timing of that, and the same with these other projects. We're not looking to take money off any project to deliver this, but we just have to have enough headroom inside the program in order not to exceed our total program budget in any given year. It's not about exceeding a budget in total, it's about the timing of the money.
So it's about achieving a net zero carry forward. So if we're bringing money back, which we have in the future, it's offset by other carry forwards. Now, some projects such as Cashmere Worsleys and Cox's Quaifs, fitting in with their timing, they have carry forwards naturally as part of it. It's not a forced delay. So that's just an offset that helps towards it. Right. The identification of the low stop banks, that's still one that's still requiring a council decision. And the intent is that we will arrange a working group with council to go through some of the issues before getting a formal decision on that. So that is that's been a challenging project, and it's taken us quite a while, but it's about doing it right and then getting the report put in front of council to make that decision. So it's all just a timing issue. And through the LTP and annual plans, if you agree any of these, then you can make other changes to compensate. It's a timing issue to make sure that everything nets to zero. That's what we're trying to achieve. It's not about forcing delays to active current projects.
So why is this one a priority? And how many people are at risk of flooding versus other LTR projects?
So this project we put forward because it's in the regeneration plan, so it is a project. There's obligations around that, but it's come up because if we don't progress this now, then we will have to undertake maintenance of the stop banks. So there will have to be expenditure for that. So this is this is saying that if we're going to do this, this is where the opportunities come up. If we're going to do this anyway in a few years' time, then we'll need to do maintenance costs now. But if we do this earlier, we don't have to do the maintenance costs. So overall, there's a net benefit. There's a net reduction in cost.
Right. And so what's the cost of maintenance?
So again, it will depend upon
we've had that answered already, Yanni.
Sorry, no, not the ongoing cost.
No,
if we didn't do the project,
Yep.
how much are we looking at spending on the maintenance?
The OPEX.
No. If we didn't do anything
capital
here
costs.
and just left it,
Oh,
what would be the cost of doing the
I
Stopbank
apologise,
maintenance?
yes. Yeah.
So it depends how long as to where this project ends up being prioritised. So if it's still first off the ranks in the budgeted year, then we might have to spend up to $500,000 on maintenance now to protect the works. If it's not first cab off the ranks and it slips a bit further down, then we really need to be doing more substantive works, and that could be up to $2 million. So we're talking about reasonable numbers and about mitigating the risk against that. So that's the reason that we've come forward with this, and we've been working on this to put it up as an opportunity to try and save cost and reduce risk.
And I guess what I was trying to understand in terms of the flood risk is how does this compare to the other properties? Like I see the flood intervention policy is one that's also going to be delayed or deferred if we agree to this. So how does the risk in terms of flooding compare in terms of the number of houses impacted by this versus other areas in the city?
There is flood risk to properties. If there was, and again, we've got to be careful that we talk about possibility and probability, and we actually understand the differences. There is a possibility that there could be in a major event, king tide and everything else, perfect storm all comes together, an immediate Stopbank failure. If you're thinking worst case, it all fails and everything comes through. In that event, there would be a significant amount of water would go across, it would flood across to Pages Road, Anzac Drive and properties surrounding that area. That's a possibility. The probability of it occurring in that time is much less. So the chances of everything coming together at once, there being a catastrophic Stopbank failure, is much less. So it's about trying to balance those probabilities up. But if we are to manage the risk, we would if this work stays with the current programme or is delayed further, then we would have to think about maintaining the Stopbank asset. And if we didn't and there was a breach, then we would be exposing both the roads and surrounding property to risk of flooding.
Right, but what I was trying to understand is, are there other properties that are at greater risk in terms of possibility and probability that if we agree to this, don't get done? And with the flood intervention policy, for example, places along the Heathcote or wherever, is there anything there that would be of a greater risk in terms of possibility and probability?
Well, the flood intervention policy is there to, as per the policy, to protect against those properties that are of significant flood risk or have been actually flooded since the earthquakes.
Above floor.
Above floor. And that there's the capital project that might protect them is going to be somewhere off. So they're going to be exposed to unacceptable risk of frequent flooding during that period. The Heathcote, we've already purchased those properties. We made offers and purchased, so as we have done in the Flockton area. So the immediate priority properties have already been given offers and dealt with under the policy. We don't currently have any planned properties that is currently budgeted against those years or forecast against those years to be making offers.
Okay.
So. And if we did have at that point, then we would put that forward again for balancing and moving on.
Right, so that's thank you. Mike and Phil, you've got one here. Mike, your question.
Thank you. A couple of questions. And actually, one that is pretty much the same as what Yanni was asking, and I still wasn't too clear on the answer actually. And obviously, this is prioritised in another area of the city over current projects that were budgeted to be started within a certain period of time, which now will get pushed out. So net neutral in terms of cost, but obviously some communities see a delay in land drainage projects in their areas. What I couldn't work out was basically what is the risk to properties in, say, St Albans and the lower Heathcote area, where we're now delaying those projects because of this project. Are there any properties that are at risk if there was a significant event in those two areas because of the delay.
Okay, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there is. So the St Albans Brick Barrel project is one where there is a natural delay occurring. So that's a naturally occurring carry forward. And it's again about taking opportunity to balance the books. So it's not a forced delay of that project. And I think that with the low stop banks, again, that the project, should it be agreed, that relates to below floor flooding and street flooding. It's not an above property risk, so it's not intended to protect against that. So have we got...
In terms of the below floor, how many properties would be getting flooded in that Lower Heathcote area below floor compared to what potentially could get flooded from doing this work?
But that's not part of the flood intervention policy.
Well, no.
That's the only thing that's being deferred.
It says in the report that I think the Lower Heathcote Stopbanks or something are getting basically deferred, so we can actually spend money on this project, the Waitaki Stopbanks. But I want to know, if we had an event in those areas, which area would actually have more impact to the communities that live around there? So because above floor flooding is pretty bad, but also below floor has actual impacts too for the people that live there. And I just want to know that we're not actually putting other people's houses, I guess, at risk to try and solve another problem.
Well, and as I say, that's one of the reasons why the low stop banks, I know we didn't come here to talk about that, but happy to answer your questions. It's one of the reasons why that's a difficult project, and it's a difficult one to prioritise, and why we would like to have a working group or a workshop with you as council to consider, because below floor flooding and on property and street flooding is, through the land drainage recovery programme, has been considered a lower priority than above floor. And so trying to balance up, as you're suggesting, because we recognise that below floor flooding does have an impact, but it is a lesser impact than above floor flooding. And so that's something which, as council, there needs to be that debate and that discussion. And so we can present that to you and try and get a good steer.
I think that's due to come in December, round about.
How can you have this?
It's not really yet, the project. Yeah.
The other question, Knight's Drain. Would this project, if this project is going ahead, would you still need to do Knight's Drain?
The short answer to that is yes. Knight's Drain has a water quality component to it. The catchment that drains to that proposed Knight's Drain pond is different to the one that's being collected at the Waitaki Street Treatment Facility. So, yes.
Okay. And also, Paul had asked at the beginning about Mana Whenua being involved with this process, and actually there a response which hasn't come. Have we tried to contact them again to get that response, knowing this report was coming today?
I'd have to confirm with the project manager, but I'll have to double check that, sorry.
So could you send a memo to us in response for that question? That'd be good.
Sure.
Thanks. Phil.
Hey guys, Mike's asked the question that I'm going to continue with. In the report that I've got in front of me here from Oricon, it said that the Knight's Drain ponds would be fine in the red zone, but we didn't own the red zone. But obviously we're going to own the red zone by the time we do this job, because I know a little bit about digging trenches in the red zone. It's not a good look. But on here, I think we should, because we're spending $8 million on the Knight's Drain ponds.
Currently on the budget it's 6.
6, okay, 6. Because the Knight's Drain has been doing its thing for the last 60 years that I can remember, I feel that we should look more at this Oricon report and getting it incorporated in this land now that we own this land, rather than doing it all on the other side of the...
Can you make it a question, Phil?
I did. That was a question.
Well, you said
have you thought about it?
In direct response to that, we now own the land that the Knight's Drain ponds are proposed to be placed. So we don't yet own the residential red zone, is my understanding. So we've already purchased that land.
Yeah.
It is for the treatment facility proposed there is is there to address the catchment that contributes from Knight's Drain. If we were to switch the location of that pond to the river side of Anzac Drive, we would have to reduce the size effectively of what we're proposing for the Waitaki Street area, and then we would get a reduced water quality benefit out of it for the other, or reduce the catchment contributing to that site. And so it's a balancing act. We need a certain amount of land area to treat the total catchment. It can occur in different places with the right hydraulics, but if we weren't to expand elsewhere, then we wouldn't achieve the water quality objectives we're looking for.
So that you would know about this Ōtākaro report from a long time ago. So how much have we spent on the Knight's Drain side of the river already on the land?
2.558 million.
Okay, so
is the spend to date. So that includes all the design works, the purchase of the land, the demolitions, all of that. And the overall forecast to completion is just under 6.8 million.
okay, because what I'm asking is that did we give any in this report? It says access to the rural red zone at this stage would be highly uncertain. That's because we didn't own it. We now own it. So why are we still spending money on the other side of the road? Did we spend money on the other side of the road in the Night Stream bit because of this report saying that we couldn't get to the rural red zone?
Well, in part, that if we look forward from today, we own or have access to all the land, and we will have to enact construction works that you're all familiar with, and dig the holes, and all that forward-looking cost is going to be required to potentially a similar degree, whether or not we construct the Knight's Drain site specifically or try and relocate that facility into the red zone. Now, there could be some opportunities to alter the layout or orientation or size of that facility,
or not do it.
Well, if we didn't do it, we wouldn't achieve the water quality outcome, and we wouldn't treat the stormwater coming down Knight's Drain. And inherently, we need to do that in order to meet our
Is that important? I'm sorry, Pauline, I'm getting off track. But
I was just about to haul you back in, because I think we should actually stick with the project that we're talking about, and you could take that offline. Leanne?
The challenge is that people, have looked at clips of the previous report that came to the council, and seeing that at the time the red zone was ruled out for largely because we didn't have access to it, but it made it sound as if it was an alternative. But what we're hearing from you today is that it's not actually an alternative, because it wouldn't clean the water that's coming from the Knight's Stream.
Yes, essentially we're looking to try and treat as much of the Avon River catchment urban area as possible. In order to do that, we need more than one facility, and they will be dotted and occupy considerable percentage of the residential red zone or the Avon River corridor. And if we were to move, say, the Knight's Drain pond into the residential red zone, well, that might mean that that's occupying an area allocated for stormwater management from a catchment we're looking to treat. So we'd have to offset that somewhere else in the red zone in order to get the same water quality outcome. So I don't think that there could be some opportunities there for optimising maybe the hydraulics in some way, to do with groundwater levels and total excavation depths, but as it stands with this facility, you would have to get the water underneath Anzac Drive from Knight's Drain itself, and then back under Anzac Drive to the pump station. So we'd have to do quite a bit of work in Anzac Drive. But then we'll be asking
that wouldn't be sufficient capacity.
Use flow water in both directions, and then we might need to push the water underneath Pages Road as well to start. I presume that would be the opportunity, is to expand this treatment facility to the south side of Pages Road. Of course, then we'd get into questions around the land use and zoning, because we have a small area set aside in the regen plan
Yeah,
for.
so I think you've been pretty clear about it, but that's really useful. My question is around 92 Bexley Road, and given that we don't own that property and won't, because it wasn't sold to the Crown, isn't it the Crown's responsibility to pay for the costs of the ingress and egress, in and out? Surely, because it's not our property.
The team hasn't been in discussions with Crown about the potential for cost recovery associated with land access to
I think it's worth, because I don't know whether we've talked to the landowner, whether they've decided that they'd like to sell the land, but I don't know. So, this wouldn't be appropriate to have the conversation in this environment. But I just wonder whether that could be just noted as something that might want to be reflected on by appropriate authorities higher up in the organisation.
I'll take a note of that. All right. Well, that's been an interesting discussion. You want to move it, Jan?
No, I just wanted to ask one question around, is this a hail site?
Essentially where the Bexley landing is proposed, there is some contaminated land there. We're not looking to excavate into that through this, into the contaminated material itself. But in fact, we may be looking to deposit more material on top of that as part of the works, because we are trying to minimise the amount of excavated material we take off site in order to manage cost. So that is one area of known contamination. We've in fact done a investigation into contaminated land, and there was some other asbestos found in limited sites and some other pesticides and other sort of other contaminants that might be typical of urban areas. So we've sort of investigated it, isolated pockets is what we found.
And just the low stop banks, I'm just trying to understand when that report, is that coming back in November or December?
It'll be either of those. I don't think we've decided on that yet, but there'll be a workshop anyway, so there's more work to be done on that.
It's just, I find it hard to agree to something today without knowing what the impact of that, it might be completely fine, but it's hard to be in a decision making to delay that project without having the opportunity to understand what the impacts are. But I'm happy just to abstain on this today if that's easier, rather than delay this meeting any further.
Do you have any other
comments? It would be good to get
because obviously
Yanni's
concerned that to support this today could be disadvantaging a project, another project. I know you have given some answers, but I guess what we want to hear from you is that it will not disadvantage that project.
Well, look, my suggestion would be that if, as part to balance the funding, there's changes and delays to the funding for the low stop banks. When you make a decision might be not to build low stop banks, in which case there's no issue. If the decision is to build stop banks, then you actually have a choice as council. Do you stick with the funding where it is, or do you bring it back and then offset it with something else? And again, it's about that constant prioritisation. I think that you have opportunities there to consider your options. And I think that with low stop banks, it is a difficult one because it is hard to give a definitive prioritisation to it because it's dealing with underflow flooding, and we're trying to compare it against projects with above flow flooding, and that's when it becomes quite difficult.
Right. Okay. So, James, one final question from you.
Kia ora. Thank you, Tom and team, for your presentation. I do have a question, and obviously this is of great importance to me because this is part of the ward that I represent. It's right on the boundary, and some significant events of it occurred there over the years and even more recently. Now, I'm going to ask you a question that is actually the title of a song, but I mean it when I ask you, and I may have even asked you the other night at the community board. In 25 words or less, song title, can you tell us why this needs to be brought forward?
Fortunately, I don't have 25 fingers to count those words on, but the condition of the stop bank is such that we're looking to accelerate the project and seize an opportunity to avoid, seize an opportunity to avoid spending excess money on the existing infrastructure.
Thank you, because I think that's the simpler that we state, the more simple statement makes it easier to get our heads around. And that was 23 words.
Would you like to move it?
And at this point, I'd like to move this motion.
Seconded by Sarah. Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Yep. That's what I'm asking for. Debate. Yes. Yep.
Look, I'm actually going to vote against this, and simply because of the wording in 7.6, there will be delays in the start of 2 land drainage projects, one being
Well, it's separate. Yep. Carry on.
Am I allowed to start?
Yes.
Yeah, I will start again if I can. Thank you. Look, as I said, 7.6, there would be delays in the start of 2 land drainage projects, one being the brick barrel replacement at St Albans. The second one, which is obviously more important to me, is the Heathcote Low Stopbanks, but also the wording, rephasing of some funding for the Cashmere-Worsley's basins. You know, we've been dodging a bullet for some time since 2014. And I don't know how many people here remember 2014. Some of the houses around the Heathcote, I went and visited almost every house that was bought out, and I went with staff. And I appreciate Keith and Tom's presentation today, but when we say, oh, well, we've bought out the low-lying ones, but the ones beside them that weren't bought out, that had water lapping under the floors, because our policy was very clear and very clear that we could not buy the ones unless the flooding was above the floor. But those families affected by the flooding around them and lapping at the floor are still there. And so I would be, without further information, I can't support this. And I am disappointed because if you look at the presentation and you look at the aerial, I don't see how many houses compared to the Heathcote would be flooded. And to say that Anzac Drive is a major road and it can be flooded and could affect, doesn't affect homes. And so I will not be supporting this today. Thank you.
Leanne and then Sarah.
I just want to back this report. I think that it does do what we're expecting of the organisation, which is to look to the consequences of not proceeding with a project, and this one I think very clearly meets that test. If it is to remain in the program where it is or be subject to potentially further pushing back, then we will face substantial costs which will be sunk costs. They won't add any value. And this is an area that does require attention. It isn't just about the houses, although there are actually a significant number of houses on the other side of Anzac Drive. It's an incredibly low-lying area. You just need to look at Pages Road as it goes from the bridge down into its little basin and then all the way up Pages Road until it pretty much hits the pump station, which is on higher ground. It's an extraordinarily low-lying area, and to put that area at risk does cover a significant number of houses along Pages Road and further back into the Aranui area. I think that the other issue that really has hit home for me is the significance of the cutting off of access around Pages Road that occurs on a regular basis now, and with those major storm events subject to increasing frequency and severity, coupled with a king tide. It has happened before and it will happen again. You know, I think that this is very good, wise decision making. So I'm very much in favour of the proposal. It looks great. I know that you haven't managed to get the feedback from Ngāi Tuhuriri yet, but having engaged with them quite significantly over water issues, the fact of cleaning up the water that is going to be discharged into the river from our stormwater networks is really going to make a significant difference and certainly improve both the quality of the water and the quality of our relationship. So I'm very appreciative and will support the motion.
Sarah.
Thank you. I can understand Councillor Scandrett's concerns, and it's always something we need to think about when we're starting to juggle projects around in time and what the impacts of those are. We have spent significant time and resources on the Heathcote River catchment on the flooding issues in recent years, and we have seen the impacts of those starting to occur where we had that very wet spot during winter, and we didn't get the flooding that we would have got in the past, and we can see some of those things really coming to fruition now. Now that we are so close, so close to owning the Avon Ōtākaro River corridor on behalf of the community, it really is time for us to start looking at what we do here and start actually getting, I guess, quick wins in an area that really needs it. This is the main entrance into New Brighton. It needs some love. It needs flood protection, and we do need the stormwater quality enhanced for our global stormwater consent. So I'll be voting in favour.
Excellent.
And note that we've split 2 and 3 off, and I think James was we're moving 1 and 2.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Melanie, then Sam.
I was going to say pretty much what Sarah just said, which is, the thing that seems clear to me, if we're concerned about costs and ratepayers, is if we can save money in maintenance costs on a Stopbank that needs a lot of work, then we should do that. And as Sarah said, and the Heathcote's my ward as well. A lot of work has already been done. We've had the dredging, the flood intervention policy, they've worked on the banks, and they've worked on the storage basins. I mean, there's been so much work there, and as far as I can tell, nothing's happened in this area. So we really need to, work on it.
Sam.
Thanks, Pauline. I'll be supporting it as well. And I think at a really fundamental level, across council, we do need to make some really hard choices as we approach the long-term plan in terms of our priorities. Completely get what you're saying, Tim, in terms of this. But I think, the staff in a way should be really commended on this, because it's seen that it's a really good opportunity to save some money long-term. I think the thing that sold it for me was the real need that if we can, provide that capital investment over the next couple of years, that we potentially save the ratepayer $2 million in maintenance costs. So a $12 million capital injection versus a $2 million sunk cost, I think is a real no-brainer. And I think the other thing that's given me comfort, and it's why hopefully it gives other councillors comfort, is I think the changing in the recommendations, which reflect, I think, a message, if this goes through today from the council, that we expect them to deliver within that $12 million. And I think that's kind of the approach we need to start taking to a lot of this, is that actually, there can be minor delegations to amend work programs, but fundamentally when reports come up saying there could be a 30% swing on stuff like this, that actually we need to put a lot more control around it so that we're not, also that we're protecting ratepayers. So I really hope people support it. It's a sensible approach, saves us long term, and I think there's enough control within those recommendations to ensure we don't have massive budget blowouts.
Thank you. Yanni.
So I appreciate that there's a need for thinking about the maintenance costs. Actually, you can go around the city and find heaps of examples of where things are having to have money spent in regards to maintenance because we can't afford to do the permanent solution. There's a number of roads actually, and just up the road, ironically, we've got erosion happening along South Shore, which I don't know when we're going to start getting the plans for that, but that seems a very real kind of thing that's happening. I think for me, the key issue with this report is we should not be getting reports that affect other projects without getting really clear information about those other projects. And that's why I'm going to abstain on this today, because I actually think there's other projects that we need information on that this project impacts on that we don't have. So I don't think we can make a good decision. We hear about the idea of being smarter in how we do things, and I totally applaud us in taking that approach. But what would have been smarter for this project is to have the Pages Road Bridge designed at the same time as the cycleway, as the Knights Drain pond thing across the road. If you think about the money we're spending in this quadrant, which must be getting close to 50 or 60 million all up, it's a massive amount of money, and yet we don't have an overall plan for it. We're going to do 4 different projects all individually without any overall concept. So, you know, I am a bit concerned that we seem to be numb to the cost of some of these projects, and it just seems a very expensive way to address something that, you know, I appreciate it's important and I want to see a good outcome for the community, but we definitely don't have, I think, sufficient information about what's happening here to be able to vote on this today, both on the terms of other projects that it impacts on, and also actually for this geographic area. So I'll be abstaining.
Thanks, Yanni. All right, anybody else? I'm going to have to find a mover and seconder for 3, which has been separated out. I'm happy to move 3. Do I have a seconder? Thanks, Melanie. All right, so that's been a really good debate, and I think that, you know, as Leanne pointed out, this is the fiscally responsible option to take to support this today. And we've got a really good land drainage recovery program team here that's been working for many years on our flooding levels to bring them back just to pre-earthquake levels, which weren't even that flash anyway. And I have a lot of faith that you are very capable of prioritising work programs so that you're not disadvantaging another project by deferring it a little bit and bringing some forward that perhaps are more worthy or more fiscally prudent to deliver earlier. So I'm comfortable with that. And this project is we are very, very bound to honour the agreements and the conditions in our comprehensive stormwater discharge consent, and this project will really help to address that, which is really commendable, and it also fits in nicely with the Red Zone Regeneration Plan and the Ōtākaro Avon Stormwater Management Plan. And we have support from the Community Board as well, and I'd like to have them stay involved if possible, and if there's any opportunity for community involvement to help with plantings there, I think it'd be really good to pick that up as well, because to get communities involved in these things, even in a small way, actually gets buy-in, and then they get used and appreciated and owned. So if there's any opportunity there. And thank you for putting the other examples of these types of floodplains in the presentation. The feedback that I'm getting from the community about them is overwhelming. People are, when they discover them, like the one round by the Lady Isaac village there, people are really blown out. Oh, this is amazing. So it's really lifting the quality of our environment, our ecology and our water. So thank you very much for the amazing work that you are doing. So on that note, I'll put the motion. Oh,
as a mover, do I get the last?
You can, yes.
Kia ora. Look, I understand and respect the views of those who may not be able to support this today, particularly Councillor Scandrett has already raised what his issues are with this, and as I say, I accept and respect that. I also note Councillor Johansson's kōrero about the overall design. I get that too. And let me say that as a first-term councillor, I learn so much each time we do these things, and I go, oh, the penny drops on a few of these things. So I do hear what you say, and I appreciate that it's a learning environment for me. However, I do want to make the point that this project will be, if passed, very, very significant for the community out past Anzac Drive, and it'll have a flow back effect on the city side of Anzac Drive as well. It's going to have an enormous benefit, but some of it will be community well-being and the way that they and we feel about our community, our local community and our city. That's what's going to be so important about this. I also just want to say that this is not just about property. Quite rightly, people asked about, you know, how many houses will this protect and so on. It's not just about property, it's about people. And it's about the safety of people who have been walking along Pages Road until I won't mention the trench.
No, don't.
Yeah, okay. So as a final statement, I just want to say that I appreciate those councillors who have made known that they support this and why they do, and I would like all councillors to think about that. And that's my lot.
Kia ora. All right. I'll put 1 and 2. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. And you abstaining? Opposed? Mike and Yanni abstain, and 1 opposition from Tim. That's carried. And I'll put 3. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. So I support, Melanie support, put your hand up, and Anne, and the rest opposed. Thank you, so that's lost. All right, so that brings us to the, thank you very much, team. That brings us to the end of the meeting. I'll do the closing karakia.